My mother-in-law demanded custody of my newborn and told me I was unfit. A week later, she collapsed on my porch, begging me to help her. I had a 2-week-old baby. I was exhausted, bleeding, and so tired. I forget names for a second. My husband worked long shifts, and his mother lived 2 blocks away and texted every day. We thought she was helpful. She showed up at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday with a man in a suit and a stack of papers. She didn't come to meet the baby or bring food. She handed me a legal-looking envelope and said she was filing for emergency custody because I was incapable of caring for the baby. My hand shook. I asked what she meant. She pointed to the hospital discharge note I had taped to the fridge and to a few dirty dishes and said I was too fragile, that postpartum depression made me a danger, that the baby needed stability, and she was the only one who could provide that. My husband answered his phone in the doorway and sounded small. He said we needed to talk privately. He asked me to breathe and promised they'd handle it. The man in the suit wrote down my name and said there was already a temporary petition. He left his card and said a judge could sign an emergency order if someone filed the right form. Everything moved fast after that. My mother-in-law left with a soft smile and a promise she was only trying to help. My husband sat on the floor with the baby carrier and said maybe we should let her stay, at least until things calm down. He sounded like he wanted peace more than he wanted me heard. I called my sister, and my sister told me to get a lawyer. I called the hospital social worker, and she said CPS might open a file if someone reported neglect. I tried to explain that I had 1 hour of sleep and a screaming baby, and I was learning how to latch a tiny human. The social worker said she couldn't promise nothing would happen. 3 days later, an intake worker from CPS called asking permission to do a wellness check. She said a complaint had been filed by a relative expressing concern about my ability to care for an infant. I asked who filed it. She hesitated and said confidentiality rules applied, but that the matter would be handled sensitively. I watched my husband scroll through his messages and his face go icy. He finally showed me one screen, a text from his mother. I filed for emergency custody. I can't watch you hurt the baby. She hit send, then blocked him from replying with a file attached. I felt cornered. My in-laws had always acted like they ran the family database. My husband called his mother and she didn't pick up. He called back and left a voicemail that sounded angry. He asked her to come by and talk face to face. She arrived that night with a paper cup of coffee and a folder. She sat across from me and opened the folder like she was organizing receipts. She pulled out notes from a pediatrician she named and said the doctor agreed the baby needed a stable person during the first 6 weeks. The notes had a typed letterhead I didn't recognize and a stamp. I asked to see the original. She said she'd scanned it to be safe. I asked if she had permission to share medical records. She said she did what she had to do to protect a child. I told her she was overstepping. She said she loved the baby and loved her son and didn't want a tragedy. Later that night we argued until my husband cried. He said his mother was panicked and maybe had overreacted. He said we could invite her in more, let her help, and avoid court. He said he'd talk to his mother and call his lawyer. I fell asleep on the couch with the baby on my chest and a new fear in my stomach. A week after the first visit, my doorbell rang at dawn. I opened the door, still wearing the same shirt from the night before. My mother-in-law was on the porch with mud on her shoes and her face white. She didn't stand up. She just sagged and said she needed help. I let her in because she was family and she'd demanded custody a week ago. Once inside, she leaned against the couch and vomited into a plastic bowl. I handed her. She said she couldn't go to her doctor and she couldn't call anyone else. She kept saying I was the only one who could help. She begged me to lie for her. She asked me to take her phone and call her bank and cancel a transfer. She said a man had been showing up at her house and threatening her, and that if she didn't do what he said, he would hurt my husband. She spoke fast and then stopped to cough. I called 911 because she was shaking and wouldn't stop. The dispatcher asked if I felt safe and if the man had a weapon. I told them I didn't know any names. The operator sent a patrol and warned that if I had evidence, I should secure it. While I waited, my mother-in-law whispered that the man had photos and that he knew things about our family. A police officer came and sat at my kitchen table and took notes. He looked suspicious of my mother-in-law and apologetic to me at the same time. He told her there were domestic violence shelters and resources and she could get a safe place tonight. She said she couldn't leave her car keys or her ID because the man would know where she went. After the officer left, she pulled out her wallet and dug about for cash in a small notebook. She handed me the notebook and said, "Please read it." She said the man had been asking for money and that she didn't have it, so she had done things to get him off her back. She said she never meant to cause pain and that she was terrified. I opened the notebook and found pages full of transactions, receipts, and a list of bank transfers. There were dates and amounts and names of accounts that didn't match any family member. There were also printouts of emails to an attorney about filing emergency custody and notes about needing custody to keep the baby safe while she sorted finances. I felt sick because her handwriting matched the handwriting on the will book my grandmother used to have. My brain clicked to the worst place. She had planned custody and then got trapped by someone else who wanted money. The notebook had a phone number scribbled between entries and one text message printed that said, "Meet me tonight or you and the boy lose everything." I called my husband and he came home from work within 20 minutes. He took the notebook like it might bite him. He said we had to call his father and explain everything, that this was a family crisis. He also called his mother's lawyer and demanded answers about the custody filing. The lawyer called back and said the filing was indeed in process and that his mother had filed it herself. We sat with the baby between us and tried to make a decision. She was pleading and scared, and we just had her try to take away our child. My husband kept repeating that he didn't want to see his mother get hurt. He wanted to find a solution that protected the baby and his mother. I called my own lawyer because I had spent enough nights crying on the kitchen floor to learn that legal counsel was not optional. My lawyer told me to get any evidence I could and not to engage in private deals. She said if someone was threatening my mother-in-law, that was a separate crime and we should involve police and protective services right away. I wanted to help, but I could not unremember that 2 weeks earlier she'd stood in my kitchen with a custody petition. She'd filed a report with CPS. I thought of the intake worker's voice and thought of how they might take my baby while they investigated. I told my husband that we needed to make a plan to both protect the baby and get his mother safe. We arranged for a meeting at the police station with an officer who handled domestic threats. My husband and I sat across from him, and the officer read the text and the bank statements we photographed. The officer agreed the threats looked real and said they'd open an investigation into extortion. He also said we had to be honest about the custody filing. My husband made a call to his father and asked him to come to the station. His father showed up with his hands shaking and said he'd take his wife to a hotel and wire money to any account the man demanded to stop him. My husband refused. He said we wouldn't pay criminals and we had to involve the bank fraud unit. At noon, the bank fraud investigator called. She had already flagged transfers from my mother-in-law's account to an unfamiliar account and had put a hold on them. She asked if we wanted to press charges for coercion and extortion. My husband said yes, quietly. Then things went sideways, in a new way. The investigator asked about the custody petition and then told us the petition included a letter from a pediatrician who had no record of treating anyone by that name at the clinic. The doctor's name was real, but the clinic had no notes. The investigator said the letter looked forged. My mother-in-law started sobbing like she hadn't in years. She said she thought she had to do something to prove she was the best option for the baby because she promised to protect my husband from some mistake he would make. She said the man had pictures from cameras he'd installed near her house and that she thought taking legal custody would show she had permanent control and maybe buy time. I asked her why she had forged the pediatric note and filed the petition without talking to us. She said she panicked. She said she wanted the baby safe, and she thought if she had legal authority, she could keep the baby away from harm. She kept repeating the word harm like a talisman. Our lawyer pushed for clear action. She said we'd file a declaratory statement with CPS to show we were the primary caregivers. She said we'd give full access to our pediatrician records and invite a social worker to our house for a voluntary visit to prove the baby was safe and loved. She said the custody petition could complicate things, but that if we cooperated fully with authorities, we could close the file quickly. I agreed to the home visit because it felt better to be proactive than to sit and replay the moment my mother-in-law tried to take my baby. A social worker came with a checklist and a tablet and sat on the edge of our couch while the baby slept in his carrier. She asked about feedings and sleeping and support systems. She asked a lot about stress and help, and we answered honestly. 2 days later, CPS closed their preliminary inquiry. They said there was no current evidence of neglect and that the case was closed, but they would keep records for a year. The relief felt like oxygen, and I cried in the kitchen for a full hour because I'd been preparing for a nightmare. After CPS closed the case, my mother-in-law went to a shelter program the police had recommended, while the bank froze her accounts and the extortion investigation continued. She begged us not to press charges because she was ashamed, and she didn't want to be arrested for forging a document. We told her to be honest with the investigators and accept help. A month later, the man was arrested after the bank traced accounts and photos. The detective called and said he had a history of minor fraud and coercion and had used threats to get money from several older women in the neighborhood. He kept careful records of payments and photos, and that chained everything together. My mother-in-law cooperated with the case and admitted forging the pediatric letter. She told the detective she had been desperate and that the man had promised to erase the photos and stop contacting her if she gave him access to funds and if she had documented legal custody of a child he wanted to use to show stability for an application he was making. The detective wrote everything down and told her the judge would decide charges related to the forgery. The courtroom day nearly broke me. I sat next to my husband and watched his mother stand in front of a judge and accept responsibility for falsifying documents and for the phone calls. The judge ordered probation, mandatory counseling, and restitution to any victims. The judge also forbade her from initiating any custody petitions for 2 years without the court's approval. At the courthouse steps, my mother-in-law fell to her knees and said she knew she had hurt us, that she had endangered our family, and begged me to forgive her. I felt my old fury flare. I told her forgiveness would be earned, and that trust was now a currency she would have to repay over time. We set new rules. No solo decisions about the baby. No legal filings without family notice. She would attend counseling and a financial literacy program the court required. She would meet with a therapist once a week, and with her son and me once a month with a mediator present. We agreed to supervise visits at first. Months later, after she complied with probation and therapy, our mediator suggested a slow return to trust. The first supervised visit was in my living room with a social worker present. She came with a single bouquet of grocery store flowers and sat on my sofa with a careful smile. The baby was older and slept less and watched everything. She played quietly with a toy and passed it to the baby and then backed up when he fussed. Small things mattered. She didn't lecture or take control. She asked if she could change a diaper and I watched her hands, expecting clumsy. She handled the wipes and the cloth and was gentle. I was not prepared for relief. Over time, the visits lengthened. We allowed her to babysit for 30 minutes while I ran an errand once, supervised by the social worker who sat in my car. She texted sensible things now, not proclamations. She apologized without explanation and without begging. She paid court-ordered restitution and opened a financial counseling account. My husband and I went to couples counseling because the custody scare had cracked something in our marriage. He had to own the times he listened to his mother beyond reason. He had to learn when to stand up for our family. He did that work. He learned boundaries. I learned to ask for what I needed without feeling shame. I still kept my lawyer on speed dial for a while. The fear had not evaporated entirely. But sitting at the playground months later, as my baby crawled toward a sandbox, my husband beside me holding my hand, I felt less like waiting for disaster. My mother-in-law called one afternoon and asked if she could bring a casserole. She said she was making something and would drop it at the door. I hesitated and told her to leave it on the porch if she wanted. She said she would come and wave from the sidewalk. I watched her from the kitchen window, and she stood in the street and waved like she belonged in a smaller, normal way. When she left the casserole, she also left a short note folded in the foil. It said she was sorry for betraying our trust and that she was getting help for how she reacted under pressure. No pleas, no demands, just that. I didn't reply at first. A week later, I messaged back that we would accept visits through the mediator and that we were not ready for her to stay overnight yet. She replied thank you and said she understood. A year after the court date, the legal ban on her filing custody without approval expired, but we kept the boundary. We had learned that laws don't erase harm, only manage risk. We had also learned we could ask for help and show up for it. People on social media ask if I should have helped her when she collapsed. They ask if I was cold when I barricaded the door after she'd tried to take our child. My answer is messy and simple. I helped her when she needed safety, but I also protected my baby. I involved police and lawyers. I made her accept consequences. That combination saved us from more damage. My husband and I still argued sometimes about trust. I still flinched when my phone buzzed with his mother's name, but the baby grew and slept in my arms, and I could breathe without imagining a courthouse taking him away. Months later, my husband and I named our son and told family to attend with spirit but not with demands. At the naming, my mother-in-law stood in the back and watched quietly. She didn't take pictures at the front. After the ceremony, she hugged my husband softly and hugged me with a short hold and then backed away. I don't know if we'll ever be what we were, but the rules and the therapy and the slow, enforced rebuilding made it possible for us to have a family without secrets and without unilateral decisions that could take a child away. I still keep that legal folder in a drawer and my lawyer's card on the fridge. And every time the baby latches or smiles, I remember why I fought so hard to keep our home safe. I don't have the neat moral ending people love. I have the real one. We set boundaries. We called help. We made people pay consequences. And we let someone try to repair what she broke. I still don't know if I did the right thing every minute, but the baby is here and we are here. And for now, that's enough.